Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of AgileDad University. My name is Lee Henson, president and founder of AgileDad, and I'm so happy that I could be with you here today. We are excited to present this very next session in our series of AgileDad University webinars. This time around, we want to focus exclusively on executives and leadership. Now, a couple of quick notes. One thing that we did this entire week to support this webinar for all of you who are joining on the AgileDad Daily Stand-Up podcast, we have put an accompanying set of podcast episodes that talk about this playbook in more detail and that dive into it. So this way, if you have an executive or a leader who maybe hadn't set aside the time to be here today, we can certainly invite them to listen to those podcast episodes and go from there. I also want to let all of you know that this session is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. So that way we can get the most we can out of the message. And I encourage you, please, if you have not already, share this with your leaders, with your managers, with your executives, with everyone, because this is going to be a powerful, powerful statement about what we see with regard to agility and business agility from the perspective of an executive. So without any further ado, let's get started. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is, AgileDad as a whole, we specialize in providing solutions, but not just any solution. We want to provide a pragmatic approach to what you do. For a long time, it was doing what the book said that was going to be good enough, but now it's not. Now you need someone who has experience, who has feet on the ground, who's walked a mile in your shoes, who can do the very things that you're looking to do. And we have a series of coaches that we've employed and put in several different situations all around the globe. We even have teams in Australia, Germany, England. So we have teams all over, and we've had the opportunity to really send out some of our coaches and really have an enjoyable session with working with executives and working with leadership to help them implement business agility. So this playbook, where did it come from? Why is it here? It's designed to answer the three most commonly asked questions. We're going to try to keep it as close to an hour as we can. Question one, what do I need to know about Agile? Question two, how do we get started? And question three, how do we responsibly scale business agility? So this playbook will be available as a PDF as well. So if you want to invite executives to read, it's certainly something that we will make available that way also. So let's start with, what do I need to know about Agile? This is probably one of the most asked questions that we get, right? People always say, okay, I'm an Agile leader. I've heard it, some teams in my organization are doing this. What exactly are they doing? How is this different than traditional project management? What's happening? So I thought we'd start with a quick view of traditional project management. Many of you may be used to seeing this traditional way of completing projects using a waterfall or plan-driven model. This is an image that displays the traditional waterfall process, and it shows that there are a lot of steps and some of which create a lot of overhead, right? So Agile was intended to take this heavyweight process and turn it into something that was more lean, that you could frequently inspect and adapt. So I guess if I wanted to tie it all together, the traditional waterfall approach forced you to think that you're completely predictive, that you know exactly what you're going to build, that you know exactly what the requirement's going to be, exactly what the cost is going to be, exactly what schedule you want it delivered in, and that you have everything there, in a plan that's a very large, I like to call it a technical user requirements document, because that's a strong acronym. But everything that you know should be included in there, and oftentimes that leads to unachievable results. Then you're given a timeline or a schedule that's a hard deadline, it's unrealistic or impossible to, completely unattainable. And then you're given a budget that's typically not enough to complete the product or service. So the question comes, how do we get the best with what we have? And the answer, of course, is if you use Agile, it's more of an adaptive process that's focused on vision and value, so that you can make sure that you're moving in the right direction and that you can see into the future and use some forecasting. But it sounds so simple here, but the truth is it's not simple. So I had some friends at Deloitte that lent me this diagram, and this shows the Agile landscape version 3. And this is a pretty good view of everything that's happening in Agile. And this might be why it's so hard for leadership and executives to get their head around. There's so much out there. There's Scrum and Extreme Programming, Dynamic Systems Development Method, and Crystal, and Clear, and Lean, and Kanban, and Kaizen, and Feature-Driven Design, and Test-Driven Design, Dynamic Systems Development Method, Deming Theory of Constraints, Design Thinking, Synerfin. Forgive me if I forgot any, but there's a ton out there. And, it's frustrating because with all of these different things out there, which road do I take and how do I know what to follow? The truth is it's crowded and there's so many ways to implement Agile in an organization, you know, especially if you think about, there's tons of different patterns and anti-patterns and things that work well together and some things that don't work together. And not even to mention the top level where there's scaling with disciplined agile delivery from PMI and large enterprise scaled solutions in Scrum and SAFe, scaled Agile Framework. There's so many different ways to get things done. The question then becomes, how do I, which steps do I take on this map to ensure Agile success? And I think that this is part of the reason why people are so confused when it comes to implementing Agile or driving Agile into the organization. So for me, I like to break it into 4 categories, and the categories are there across the bottom. I like to break things into initiate, discover, deliver, and release. Those are the 4 categories. And I often say that we should try to make sure that we're doing at least something in each of those categories. One of the common pitfalls or mistakes that organizations make is they'll jump straight to deliver. And when they jump straight to deliver, this is great if you have a product owner that has a well-formed, well-designed backlog, if your organization doesn't have a whole lot of technical debt, if you've got some things going on, then this works really well. The problem comes when your organization does have outstanding technical debt and they don't have a good framework in place and they're just doing Agile in name only, and it creates chaos. So I guess the crux of what I'm trying to say is don't get hung up on it's too complicated to do or we need to pick one thing and stick to it. Figure out a way, or at least we're going to help you figure out a way that you can navigate this, that you can traverse this in a way that makes sense, in a way that's easy, in a way that's forthcoming, in a way that makes you feel like, hey, I have my head around what's going on. So the first question is, what do I need to know about Agile? So first, right out of the gate, Agile's not a one-size-fits-all model. Not everyone looks good in spandex, right? I know I don't. So it's not a red pill, blue pill approach, right? We can't just sit here and say there's a magic wand or a magic stone or a silver bullet. None of those things apply. Agile is not, so all these things that Agile is not. So it's not red pill, blue pill. It's not silver bullet. It's not, get this, about just getting work done faster. It's not your ticket to increase in productivity instantly. But the truth is, here's what it is. If you apply business agility and Agile using a humanistic, modern, pragmatic approach, it becomes a tool to help you eliminate waste and focus on outcome over output, which is exactly what you're trying to do. The race to build the most widgets is officially over. I've waved the flag, it's over. We don't need to do that anymore. Modern companies are learning to dig in and identify their target consumers better so that they can build as little as they need to build and allow well-formed teams to swarm and get the work done, driving increased revenue and faster time to market. So when people ask me, what is Agile about? I usually refer back to one of the very first books that I got from a gentleman named Ken Schwaber. He was one of the founders of Scrum. And I got this book from him circa 2003. And he said, Lee, he says, Agile is all about common sense. It's centered around doing what makes sense. And I think that if you look at a pragmatic approach to Agile that way, then you're going to start doing what makes sense. It's going to drive you to lead your organization in a way that makes sense. So in order for you to do that, you need to kind of get your head around what type of things you should expect to see. What's going to happen? What are you going to discover? So true business agility is going to help you learn about current economic and market factors. It's going to help you learn about yourself and your competitors with regard to technological advances, internet, mobile, and social media, globalization of workforces and economies, quickly evolving environments, the introduction of disruptive technologies, both internally and from competitors, acceleration of information, and of course, this is a big one, the new war for talent. Now, these all came from McKinsey back in 2018, but this war for talent still is going on today, where some of the most qualified people are the hardest to get. Everybody has some type of Scrum certification or Agile certification or SAFe certification or And I think that's great. Don't get me wrong. I teach some of those classes, but I think there's a huge disparity in the quality of what you get that goes with quantity of the number of letters behind your name. So I think that you need to find someone who really is dedicated and focused to fill the most important roles to help your organization really get a solid understanding and a solid implementation of Agile. There are 5 trademarks that also come from McKinsey. The first one is a North Star embodied across the organization. And if you have these trademarks, your organization is on the right track. One of the things that we discover when we go into organizations is that they don't like to make that cultural and mental mind shift. It's hard. It's not easy to start thinking differently, to start thinking in terms of we, to start thinking in terms of, shifting everything back to a common vision and a common strategy and a common goal. So that's something that we need to regenerate and regrain our focus. The second is to create a network of empowered teams. The key word there is empowered. One of the things that I see is that I go into many organizations where they have teams that are going through all the motions of being agile, but they're not at all empowered. They don't feel like their opinion matters. They don't feel like what they're building makes a difference. They really struggle to understand and to engage, or to understand and engage in a vision of how what they're doing is going to impact what end consumer. It's almost as if I pin some people down and I ask them, why do you work here? What are you trying to contribute? Or what value are you adding? And, I've heard people say, because that's what I get paid to do. And that scares me. I don't want to be in that environment. I think that, through business agility, we should be able to press way past that. And we should be able to really have empowered teams that understand what they're doing and who they're serving and how they're going to help. And these are all things that you as an Agile leader can help with. Next is rapid decision making and learning cycles. In other words, rapid learning cycles means that at some point you're going to fail. There, I said it. I said the F word, fail. It's okay, right? It's okay to fail as long as you learn from the failure and as long as you make rapid decisions and you create these rapid learning cycles. Failure can actually be one of the best things that ever happened to you because it's a learning experience and it helps you grow. I've worked with several executives, and I explicitly remember one executive who said to me, she said, failure breeds innovation. And if we can't innovate, then who are we as a company? And she's right. If you're ever going to innovate, failure is required in order for innovation to occur. So I thought that was really interesting. Next is dynamic teams that ignite passion. This one I love. I love that line. When I think about teams, I don't want just teams that all have the same skill set or they all are same culturally or they're all believing the same things with regard to Agile. And they're all, the more diversity I can get, when it comes to diversity, inclusiveness, equity, all those good things, I believe the more diverse you can make teams and the more dynamic you can make teams, the better they're going to perform, the better they're going to be. There's excitement, energy around diversity and around involving different people. And I think that if you get a team of dynamos that are all a little bit different, but deep in one area, but also have the span to be completely cross-functional, that's going to just spark this passion, this love for what they do. And, I've been in those organizations too, where I'm like, hey, so tell me what you do, and they'll tell you what they do. And I can tell you a good example of this is SpaceX. So SpaceX is a fairly agile company. And, and one of the things I saw there is everybody you talk to is so excited to tell you about SpaceX. They're so passionate about it. And it's just so cool to see the fire in their eyes, whether it's the rocket launching into space or the beautiful splashdown yesterday. It just, they're so happy to be part of something bigger. And I think that in our organizations, we need to fight for that same charge. We need to ignite that same passion. And as leaders, it's our responsibility to either make that happen or make sure that it does happen. And then a focus on the next generation of products and services. This is something that the Apple company does very well. They don't always focus on, how is this going to impact a previous, OS or iOS instance of whatever they're trying to build. They'll focus on it and say, let's make sure we make these corrections in the future to streamline or make things easier instead of constantly trying to reverse engineer everything to fit back into previous systems, which I think is pretty dynamic and pretty awesome, right? And that's what makes Apple the company that they are. And I think this naturally leads you to think about where you are as an organization. So where are you? Are you in a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? And I think that, the way to evaluate this, the way to look is ask yourself, if you have complexity and uncertainty leading to unfocused solutions, that's probably a fixed mindset, and you need to move towards a growth mindset. Using Agile allows teams and organizations to iterate their products and services so that they can get into this growth mindset. So these are the steps that it takes to move into it. Empirical process control allows organizations to inspect and adapt and to transparently make changes and optimize. Limit your work in progress. Learn to focus on outcome over output. Remember, less is more. We're not trying to be the person who builds the most widgets. We're trying to be the person who builds the best widgets, the ones that people want, right? And Agile, true business agility promotes a real growth mindset. So this is that mindset where you're saying, okay, I know what I have to do, and I know how to get there. So what am I going to do to make it happen? But unfortunately, lots of organizations get to this point and they get excited, but then they start doing what I call agile in name only. So let me show you an example of what that means, because that sounds kind of confusing. So this is something that I teach in many of my certification courses, but I've never formally put it into a presentation with a workbook before. So this is the first time that you'll be seeing this live this way. So if I have two 5-year timelines, and the top timeline represents your organization, and the second timeline represents another company that's doing Agile very well, that has everything implemented, they're fully scaled, they're a well-coached organization, they're doing things right, yes? On the top company, let's say that you want to implement Agile. So what do you start off with? You start off by, and I've been to this company before where I go in and I say, hey, how's it going? They go, great. I said, so tell me, how are you, how are you in your Agile implementation? Where are you? And they said, well, we're doing pretty good. I'm like, that's excellent. So tell me more. And they said, well, we have that 15-minute meeting for at least 45 minutes every day. We do that daily meeting for at least 45 minutes to an hour. And those 2-week things, we've expanded those to be a full 6 weeks. So we get 6 weeks of work done each iteration. I'm like, outstanding. They said, yeah, they said, and we take all of our subject matter experts and help them coordinate with our product managers and our product owners and our business liaisons and our team improvement coordinators. And we put together, a solutions manager type person who oversees all this and puts together a nice backlog of items, 10,000 items. And we have our people divided across multiple projects and products that we can make sure we're optimal. I'm like, oh my goodness. Somebody down the road didn't get the message, right? The message fell off somewhere. So what happens as a result of this? If each of these timelines are 5 years apiece, right? So we'll start with saying line A and line B, they're each 5 years, right? So no difference there. For the sake of easy math, we'll say both companies A and B have 5 major product or 5 major project initiatives that they need to deliver in that 5-year timeline. Company A gets all the leadership team and product managers together on day one in order to decide what initiative is going to be the most important to address first. And after several hours of meetings, they vote and decide that all 5 initiatives are equally important. They'll be worked on all at the same time. So we reduce the team size to pretty much nothing, and we take our most powerful individuals and divide them. You're going to work 20% on this project, 31% on this project, 72% on this project, 19% on this one, and 84% on this one. Because someone went to a community college in bad math, that equals 100% of your time, which obviously it doesn't. And these people are stressed and stretched across working all these different projects and all these different things that are happening. And then people start fighting and the battle comes out for the best people. And then after 5 years of what might be the most painful engagement you've ever worked on, this group delivers projects 1 through 4. Now, I didn't say they were well. I just said they delivered projects 1 through 4. Not bad. On the last day possible, they hit the deadline. Each initiative is low quality. It's exactly what the customer asked for 5 years ago. And it's got about, I don't know, it's painful. You've made 0 revenue the entire time. The 5th project wasn't even delivered, so someone's upset about that. But I think the big kicker here is you've earned exactly $0 in revenue for building these 5 projects. It's a nightmare, right? When asked if the company was doing Agile, of course, they said everything that I told you before, right? This company insisted that they were doing Agile. Let's take a look at the other company and see how they're doing, because I think it's going to go a little different. So in their story, same thing, 5 projects, 5 years, but on day 1, this company decided They got the product owner and a few key stakeholders together, had a small, short meeting. They all agreed that project number one would be the first initiative that's the most important that they need to tackle. Before I go any further, I just want to make sure I emphasize this. In no way am I trying to say that large companies put all their focus on one thing. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is companies, large or small, should reduce the number of projects in motion so that they can get a reasonable number in motion so that they can have completion. So let's walk through it. So they agree one is going to be the one they need to work on. Well-formed, cross-functional T-shaped teams all swarm to work on the first initiative to get it done. Of course, there's a couple of teams that say, hey, I don't know about this thing. I don't know how to build this thing. And we're like, you know what? We're going to let you start laying the groundwork for number two because that might be something you're more familiar with. So let's scoot you guys over to number two and have you start working on that one. And sure enough, those well-formed teams that are working hard on project number one at 1.25 years in, they finish project number one and they deliver it. And it is well, it is good. So now we get the remainder of the teams to start swarming and dedicate their time to project number two. So they'll move over. So they start going crazy working on project two. Life is good. While the teams are working on project two, key stakeholders and maybe one of the team leads has a meeting and they discussed that there's been some market changes and the consumer desires have changed. And we no longer need projects 3 or 4. They just don't make sense to work on. It's not something that we need to do. So instead of jumping on 3 or 4, as soon as they're finished with project 2, they quickly pivot and start working on project number 5. Finally, at the 5-year mark, they deliver number 6, but they didn't finish number 7. But the good news is nobody really cared that they didn't finish number 7 because it wasn't originally on their plate. So now you have this group who swarmed. They limited the work in progress and they swarmed to work on these projects and they finished projects number 1, 2, 5, and 6. But there's a couple of key differences. Actually, there's 3. So let's talk about those key differences in delivery and the way these projects were handled. The first big difference is customer satisfaction. When you try to do it all and you try to do it all at once and you stretch things out over time, the best you're going to get, the absolute best you're going to get is 20% consumer satisfaction. And I think that number is high. That was based on a report from a Standish group called the Chaos Report. And I think that number is still incredibly high. They say 20% of what you build is used 80% of the time. I'm using that number just to give us a solid metric. The second company says that they have 70 to 90% customer satisfaction because they're building things in a shorter time frame, getting feedback from the customer along the way, and making adaptations as they go. I know that number is true because I've worked with those organizations and I've seen these statistical numbers. I've seen this data. So regular incremental delivery dramatically increases customer satisfaction. Your goal should be to always focus on the outcome and not the output. So the number one goal should be to make the end consumer as happy as possible with as little output as possible. Agile then promotes working smarter and not harder. So the second big difference, the second key here, is eliminating waste. So on the top timeline, we worked on projects 1 through 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everything went well. Things went great. The problem is we delivered them all at the very end. On the bottom timeline, we delivered projects 1, 2, 5, and 6. So in essence, because the organization limited the number of projects that were in flight, they were easily able to discover at the halfway mark, at the 2.5-year mark, they were easily able to discover that they had waste and that they didn't need projects number 3 and 4, and they were able to quickly pivot and move away from those. Now, what's cool is instead of building projects that were pointless, the team decided that they were going to deliver value, and they worked with the organization to understand, and thereby eliminated 200% waste. They didn't bother building 3 and 4 because no one would ever use them. So that's fact, and that's the way it is. The third key difference is an increase in revenue. This is the big one. So on the top timeline, you didn't make any money because you didn't deliver anything until the very end. On the bottom timeline, you actually made 7.5 years of revenue. On this first project here, you didn't make anything because, well, you delivered it at the very end. That's project number 6. On project number 5, you made 1.25 years of revenue. On project number 2, you made 2.5 years of revenue. And on project number 1, you made 3.75 years of revenue. If I use my Tulane University of Utah education and add that together, that equals 7.5 years of revenue that you can include there. So 7.5 years of revenue versus 0 revenue. And if you're a company that makes millions or billions of dollars a year, you can do the math here, and it's pretty no-brainer, right? But I think the part that no one thought of is that this revenue model could also be scalable across multiple products if each one of your products used one of these timelines. So if I wanted to give you a quick summary, and this is once again an overview. Once Company B discovered the model worked so much better, they made an incremental delivery timeline for each and every product in their organization. So they were able to increase their revenue by 7.5 years for every single product that they delivered over a 5-year period, which is incredible. So they were able to have, just increase revenue, increase customer satisfaction, less waste. It's all here. Company B clearly has the advantage. But I think there's one key here. Both companies in the beginning claimed to be doing Agile, but only one company was truly being Agile in thought and deed. The other was only Agile in name only. They wanted to do the meetings and go through the motions, but they weren't getting the benefit of doing Agile, right? So they had great intentions. They just didn't have qualified training. They didn't have an external coach. They didn't have the people that they needed to take care of the company to bring them to a fully scalable Agile implementation. They just didn't have all the pieces they needed to make it right. So the key that I want to make sure I mention here is whether it's my company or another, making sure you have an external Agile coach with a view from the outside. That's what makes this run smoothly. This is what makes everything flow until your organization is ready to take the wheel and run with it. So this is something that I'd strongly promote here in this setting. So with that being the case, the next question we get, number 2, is how do we get started? So this is absolutely the most commonly asked question that we get. When we go into organizations, they're like, we want to do this. We have some teams that are doing it, some teams that aren't. We have people who are skeptical. We got some believers. We have some leadership on board, some leadership not on board. How do we get started? What do we need to do? And, I always start with one question. It's my lead in. I'm like, okay, so tell me, why did you pick Agile? What problem are you trying to solve? What solution are you trying to make better? And why did you pick Agile to solve the problem? If your answer to me is we read the book and we're trying to do twice the work in half the time, or we want to increase our productivity by 1,500%, whatever that is, I hear Dr. Jeff Sutherland and I understand where he's trying to go with this, and it definitely gets people excited, but those aren't necessarily the right reasons to implement Agile. When I ask people why they want to implement Agile, I want them to be able to explicitly tell me, as an organization, we're trying to do this. We're trying to solve this problem. We're trying to make this better. We're trying to increase consumer awareness about this. We're trying to make things flow better. No matter what it is, we want to make sure that, we're setting realistic expectations and that this ties to the organizational vision and strategy. So once we determine, hey, Agile's a good fit, that this works from both an organizational perspective and from a cultural perspective, because that's so important, we choose a single initiative to kick things off. And then the team, so the team here at AgileDad, we created something called a document called the 12-step implementation program. It's an Agile 12-step document. So my background, my degree is in psychology. So yes, so this makes sense. It's something that you can apply, and it shows you the first series of things that one of our coaches would look for if we were engaged with you at your organization. So it's just a very strong, solid way for you to see that. So the document's not all or nothing. It's not required to be completed in order, but it does highlight the first 12 steps one of our coaches would take in order to help your organization get jump-started with your Agile implementation. So I do have a document regarding this, and there's another webinar. So not trying to sell you backwards here, but there's another free webinar that you can look at that talks about specifically the 12 steps. And that was one of the more recent webinars that we did. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen that, to go and have a look, go and have a gander, because there's definitely some value there. There's definitely some things you'd want to see. But for the 12 steps, I wanted to at least give you a high level here, because I think it's important for you to understand those and see what direction we're trying to take you. So let's quickly go through the 12 steps and give you those. So step 1 is identify the problem you're trying to solve and tell us why you chose an Agile to solve the problem. We just talked about that. We want to know why you really thought Agile was a good solution. To make sure that you understand Agile and to make sure that all your leadership team understands Agile in a way that implementation is going to be easy and smooth. Second, we want to set proper management and leadership expectations. So we want to establish a clear vision and strategy organizationally and make sure that both culturally and that you're aware culturally that things are going to change, that it requires a mind shift, and that organizationally you're ready to take on these new challenges that Agile will present. 3 is identify and establish a distinction of every Agile role. But this is where it gets interesting. I want you to learn about every Agile role, and I want you to learn about every Agile title, but then I don't want you to try to map a title to one of your current titles. I don't want you to map, if you have a business analyst and say, well, our systems business analyst does this. I don't want you to try to compare apples to apples with what my definition of a business analyst is. What's going to happen if you do that is frustration. Instead, what I want you to do is go through the entire list of responsibilities and requirements for that role, and then ask yourself, who fulfills these things in my organization? Do we have enough of these kind of people? Who are these people? And call them out by name. And if you need help, lean on others to get you that information. And over time, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap within roles, and you'll see that there's some gaps where there's nothing there. And I think it's important to address both of those in order for your organization to really, really be on the cusp of agility. 4 is, oh, and by the way, yeah, with regard to number 3, I also say avoid role sharing. So you don't want somebody to have so many roles. I don't want somebody to say, well, I'm the Scrum Master, product owner, and an active team member. That should be your sign right there that something's wrong. For number 4, focus on true product ownership by creating and refining a well-defined product backlog. I got news for you. Out of the 12, that's the hardest one. And just like a real 12-step program, step 4 is the doozy, right? Step 4 is the hardest thing to do. And it sounds so easy on the surface because you've got good, strong product owners that were subject matter experts and solution managers to help them. But the key here is, no matter what roles or titles you have in your organization, trying to get a product owner to balance between understanding the needs, wants, whims, and desires of the consumer, the strategic readiness and awareness of the organization, and the technological feasibility of the team, and trying to balance all that together to create a solid backlog. And typically they're working on more than one product, which I don't recommend, but typically they do. So now you have somebody who's working on 6 different products trying to do all that. It quickly turns into a mess. It quickly turns into something that's unobtainable. So that's the one that's going to require a lot of heavy lifting. So number 4 there, focus on true product ownership. That's the one that's going to require the heavy lifting. Number 5 is my favorite in the list. Hold proper Agile meetings with the correct purpose, attendees, and agenda. I'm known throughout the world for saying no agenda, no meeting. It's just what I say. I say it all the time. I'm like, no agenda, no meeting. And, I am a big fan of shutting down meetings. If I think things are going south, if I think that we're not being productive, if I think that we don't have a clear agenda, or if we don't have a clear goal. So I'm a big fan of running more frequent meetings for shorter periods of time with smaller audiences with an actionable deliverable. And if you can do those things, you're going to be fine. But we want to make sure that you shrink those meetings the best you possibly can, right? And, another sign is if you find that team members are in attendance of every single meeting, that's probably a bad sign. You need to figure out a way to get them out of meetings so that they could be back at their desk providing the work. Step 6 is clearly identify and define a proper release cadence or cycle. You want to establish a good cadence. So, we all can't be Amazon where we're delivering code every so many seconds. I believe it's somewhere in 6 seconds now, 6 to 9. It's scary. But they can deliver and push out brand new things every 6 to 11 seconds. I mean, that's huge. Not everybody has the capability to do that. So, absolutely amazing. So we want to make sure that, when we're focused on proper delivery cadence, we all can't be like Amazon. The example I like to use is I worked with one of the cruise lines. And for those of you who aren't familiar, cruise lines typically have a motto. It's for newlywed or nearly dead. So you get that kind of blend, you don't get a whole lot of middle families in there. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but what I'm saying is it's interesting, right? So if you've got a whole bunch of people who are a lot older, they may not be as comfortable with that many changes or with a cadence or frequency of changes. So you just need to be careful with how you change things and the impact. It's a lot about knowing your end consumer. Step 7 talks about taking time to measure consumer satisfaction and clearly identifying your persona. So I ask people all the time, do you know who your target audience is? Who does this appeal to? Who are you trying to produce this product or service for? And you'd be surprised how many times people say, I don't know, or they're not sure. It's just, it's one of these things where you need to understand who the consumer is. And if you don't know who the consumer is, find out. And that could be through focus groups, that could be through direct interviews, that could be through surveys, that could be through A/B testing, that could be through social media sentiment. There's so many different ways, direct user observation. There's lots of different ways for us to figure out who the consumer is and whether or not they're happy. I recall I worked on a project for a law enforcement agency where we thought, oh, we had the most powerful product on the planet. It had so many different widgets and gadgets and things that it could do. But the truth was the people who worked in law enforcement hated it because it did so much that it was overbearing and it didn't do the simple things well. So sometimes it's taking a step back and measuring simplicity. And that leads us to step 8. Step 8 is enhancing programming or build practices. And the reason I put this in here is programming applies to technical projects, build applies to non-technical projects. So whether you're building an ad campaign or building a house or building a car, or whether you're programming for a new technology, an app, whatever the case may be, it works the same way. We need to focus on delivering the best outcome for the end consumer with as little output as possible. We don't want to sit here and bust our hide, cranking out as much output as we can. We need to remember that less is more, and we need to focus on optimization of what we can do. And I think that a lot of times we don't optimize. Someone brought up on one of the panel boards here that their company has 1,500 items in a backlog and can't understand why nothing's been delivered in the last 18 months since they started the Agile, right? And this is common. This is something that I see. I totally agree, and I get it, right? It's amazing to see what happens here. So I think it's incredibly important for us to be able to really, zoom in and understand how we work together on programs and how we build things that make sense. Step 9 is enhanced testing or inspection practices. So testing, if you're doing something technical, you could test some things that are non-technical, or inspection if you're doing something non-technical. Even when you're building a home, it goes through a ton of inspection, right? You have so many different places or points where you need to inspect the electrical, inspect the plumbing, inspect the walls, inspect the, even the footings. You have to inspect everything to make sure the home's built on solid ground. So I think here it's just focusing on consistently delivering high quality. Ask yourself, how happy are the consumers? And an easy comparison here, there was a study done where they compared Microsoft and Apple. And they said from an operating system perspective, how happy were the consumers? And what they quickly found was that in this case, people were frustrated because Microsoft was constantly giving updates to fix things that may or may not need to be fixed. And people were happy with the Apple product in this case because it required fewer updates and it was good. A different example might be on the flip side. They did a study between people who used Apple phones and Android phones. And what they found is people who preferred simplicity and ease of use leaned more towards Apple products. People who wanted cutting edge technology leaned more toward Android products. So it just goes to show you that you need to understand your audience in order to understand how to best program or build and how to best test or inspect. Step number 10, and notice how far down the list it is. And like I said, these don't have to be done in order, but they work better if you do. Step 10 is talking about securing the proper Agile tooling solution to track your status, create great visual indicators, to get the point across. And I think that this one's interesting because so often I work with teams who get the tool first, and then they say, we're going to build our process around the tool. We're going to build everything we do around what the tool allows us to do. And I'm like, ouch, that's not how it should be. You should figure out your framework and how you want to build things first, then find the right tooling solution that matches. So whether it's Azure or Jira or version 1 or Rally software, whatever you're using, there's so many different ones out there. There are hundreds of them. Don't get hung up on letting the tool drive what you do. Figure out what you need to do, and then implement the tool to be a good, clear visual indicator at every level. Step 11 talks about identifying ways to measure team success. Help teams assemble working agreements and set goals so that they can be successful. I remember working in an organization where they celebrated every time a story was finished, and people were just like, that's kind of crazy. They clapped and did things. But I'm like, if that helps them keep their morale up and if that helps them see things through the end, then why not celebrate team success? You need to find what works because every team's built a little different. We need to find what works culturally for the organization and what type of things they want to do to celebrate and give them an opportunity. It doesn't need to be over the top or super expensive, but we need to find ways to let teams measure and celebrate their success. And then finally, there's always going to be more. So step 12 is a wash, rinse, repeat, kind of like shampoo. You identify the top 3 outstanding remaining items or issues, address those, and then move on to the next 3 and the next 3. Reminds me of that commercial with DJ Khaled being your toothbrushing coach, and another one, and another one, and another one, right? We need to make sure that we're focused on those outstanding remaining issues and that we're addressing those. And then as soon as we get that piece addressed, then we can roll in and say, okay, let's look at the next thing and the next thing. But we don't want to lose sight of the previous 11. So a lot of times what I'll tell organizations to do is to print out a copy of the 12-step guide and literally mark it up, even score it if you want, between rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 and see where you are, and then check back in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days from now and see if you have recognized improvement. Because one of the things we saw most recently is that organizations understand this, but then they don't go back and try to focus on continuous improvement. So you want to make sure you're going back and focusing on what you can do to improve. So really strong document, really strong stuff. I encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't already. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the data behind this. So there is some data-driven proof. So all the statistical data is underneath where these stats come from. But 67% of organizations find that Agile has improved the frequency of their product releases. That's cool. That's awesome. So they're able to deliver more frequently. 74% of organizations report that Agile practices have resulted in increased productivity. That's also very good, right? We want to see increased productivity. 66% of organizations have found reductions in costs greater than or equal to at least 10%. Okay, I'll buy that. 57% of organizations report improvements in execution capabilities due to increased company-wide collaboration. Wow, there you go. So this is where it's starting to touch on some of the scale pieces. And then finally, this is my big one, 83% of organizations attributed improved transparency and project level visibility to their Agile practices by building in Agile. So there's so many studies and so many things that prove that this works, and these numbers have gotten better over time, right? So it's a matter of trying to understand the data and interpret it. So what I find is that when people see this, they say, that's great. I just want to scale. I want to get it done all at once. I want to try to get as many products or services out there as I can. I want to just build. How can I push the organization? And the truth is, most organizations that are moving towards scaled Agile solutions are doing it without having a clear, well-established foundation. So they're trying to run before they crawl or walk. And if you don't have a good, clear Agile implementation, if you don't have a good, solid footing, it's hard to build on top of that. Organizations should first focus on nailing business agility on a number of small projects before they even consider implementing a scaled approach of any kind. So you want to make sure that you're not falling into that point of failure. This is a common point of failure that many companies on their Agile journey fall into. It's important that you as leaders understand that you need to be patient with teams and be patient with product owners and let them initialize and get the framework into motion before you push them towards scaling, before you push them towards something bigger. If we can get that focus necessary from the leadership level, it's going to afford an opportunity for the teams to perform better. And once the organization's established a good flow, at that point, you can start saying, okay, let's consider scaling implementations. But here's the key, and this is an important message. When it's time for you to scale, right, you need to make sure that you have a set of eyes from the outside. We strongly recommend bringing in a really powerful Agile coach with years of experience in scaled implementations to act as a guide, even if it's just initially from the outside, to get you on the right track. At this point, once you're on the right track, then you can establish an internal Agile center of excellence to help keep you on track. And then that person can fade away and you can manage your implementation without the assistance of an external coach. So the external coach should provide you with some leadership up front. What type of things are going to help you prepare? Well, I'll give you the top 3. So here we have the 3 keys to preparing to scale. So these are three things that every organization, regardless of what you build, whether it's a product or service, technical or non-technical, these are the three steps, the three keys that you need to prepare to be ready to scale. First, training. You know, it's very helpful for an organization to all be on the same page. Even if you have groups and pockets that know a lot about Agile, even if you have people who are doing Agile and have been doing it for a long time, it's still healthy to do something like we offer, for example, something called Advancing and Scaling Agile. It's a workshop. And what we found is the organizations that take this non-certified workshop always come back to us and say that was worth its weight in gold. Because now we're all speaking the same language. We all kind of have an idea of where we're trying to drive things and what we're trying to do. And we're able to get everything and everybody on the same page. It gives you that clarity around a vision and strategy, and it helps everyone understand the roles and understand why it's important to do things consistently. And it focuses on more than just the basics. This is a scrum master, this is a backlog item, it's way beyond that. But it helps people see going forward what type of things they can expect to see when this agile thing kicks off, and it helps them see what the future might look like. So it's almost like having a crystal ball and being able to see into what's going to happen. It's kind of cool. But the key here is to find a trainer organization that uses a really pragmatic approach to this. Unfortunately, I have actually been in some sessions with, I've been in sessions with some of these organizations where they bring in an external trainer, and the trainer pulls out their book and says, on page 371, it says we shouldn't do this, right? It's incredible to me that people in the organization just look at this and they think, I'm going to bring in a person for the lowest cost. It's like finding a person who's the least expensive in your city to fix a pothole. It never ends well, right? The pothole keeps coming back. But the key here is to find an organization that takes a real humanized, pragmatic approach and has a wealth of experience. And once you know this information, then you'll discover it takes a lot more than what the book says to succeed, right? So the book's not enough. And that brings me to coaching. So no single external person in the world is more critical than a well-qualified Agile coach. Bringing in an Agile coach from the outside pays for itself tenfold. I think the study that Alistair Coburn did said 7-1. So even if it's 7-1, it's not bad. But this is the person who's going to help you go through the empirical process of inspect and adapt for your entire framework. They're going to help you create that environment of psychological safety and encourage teams and other people to display radical candor communication, to speak up, speak out. And they're going to recognize that the view from the outside is different than the view from the inside. And investing in a coach, you get your money back very quickly. It reduces your time to implement it and the speed, and it helps you get to high performance just very quickly. So that speed alone is enough to make this a real good investment for your organization. So it's something you need to do. And I think the third key is the hardest one, and that's that culture shift. True business agility requires a change in your mind. It requires a mind shift set. And Agile organizations think and behave differently. It's true. If you just go down a list and look at organizations that do Agile well, they behave differently. They put great focus on the needs of their internal users first, their people, prior to shifting their focus to their external consumers. So they do everything they can internally to make sure the people internally have everything they need to be successful. Then they'll shift their focus externally. Keeping people happy and giving them the right training. I remember there was a quote that I was with a world-class executive, and somebody walked up to him and said, you could save so much money just by trimming your training budget. If you trim your training budget, you can increase your revenue in this area by 20%. Besides, what happens if you train all these people and they leave? And this executive turned and smiled and looked him square in the eye and says, what happens if I don't train them and they stay? Right? It's that mentality shift that helps you understand, that the organizational mood needs to shift. The organizational culture needs to shift. And when you start seeing a shift in culture, that's the time when you start standing up the Agile Center of Excellence and discovering how well your implementation is going and where there's gaps, so that you can see how deep it's been disseminated in your organization. And then you can consider a scaled approach to this once you have all these things down. But these are the three tenets and the three keys that I tell everyone. If you're considering scaling, do these three. And yes, that quote was from Richard Branson, and I've worked very, very closely with that group. So good call. So then begs the question, what are my responsibilities, right? What do I need to know? The truth is, any change to framework that you deliver, whether you're delivering products or services, doesn't matter. It should be treated with a serious demeanor. It's time for leadership to step up and engage to help create an environment of psychological safety that is needed for organizations to be successful. So great Agile leaders, here's a short list. They do the following. They provide a clear organizational vision and strategy. No questions. They look to the people doing the work for answers. They don't try to figure it out themselves. They say, hey, you're doing the work. How would you do this? Or why do we do this? Or why is it this way? They inspire and reward innovation. That's a cool one. Apple's known for doing this. Google's known for doing this. Anytime you do something that's wildly innovative, you're rewarded for it. And that is so cool. But they instill passion in every single team and drive them and motivate them and light that fire underneath them. And then they always try to be a leader with wisdom and by example. I love this quote. Jack Welch from GE said, if I did my job right, they won't be saying it was a one-man show. They'd be saying that I was a catalyst to help other people be successful, which I think is totally true. And I think that the key here for you to really be successful as an Agile leader is to understand the three things that you have control over, that you can change immediately, that will help the organization as a whole be successful. Number one on the list, the one that everyone finds the most difficult to change at the ground level, is an Agile funding model. So when you're funding your projects, successful Agile organizations change the way they fund things. They fund teams to be successful and let the teams jump on the initiatives. Or if they are going to fund the actual work, they break the work into the 4 categories and they set aside a small amount of money for ideation, some money for that initialization and discovery. Then they set aside a chunk later for the build out. And the reason they do that is if they go through the first 2 phases and decide it's not worthwhile, they can still easily pivot and save a lot of money and reallocate that money to another product or service. So it's important that you do things in an incremental way. Just like you're building the project incrementally, you should fund a project incrementally, with the exception of if you're funding teams, in which case you should fund the team and let the team successfully build what they're trying to do. In the real world, this is called Agile Earned Value, and there's lots of formulas you can see about this, and we even have a podcast coming up about this. So good topic, and we'll talk more about it soon. The second is that organizational vision and strategy. I can't emphasize enough that having everyone marching to that North Star that we're talking about, not second star to the right, although I love Peter Pan, I got the green on. We're talking about marching to the same drum, marching to the beat of the drum and getting things done. A common technique or a couple of common techniques that we use, we teach Agile leadership about a concept of an Agile press release, where they can establish a clear vision and strategy and get it encapsulated in the size of an elevator pitch statement. And that works incredibly well. The second one that we do is grow, where we have executives and leaders. We sit with them and we say, okay, what is your ultimate goal? What is your end game? What are you trying to achieve? And then we say, okay, once we understand your goal, what's your reality? Where are you now? How far away are you from that goal? Then we say, what options or opportunities do we have going forward? And then what will you commit to do to push us in that direction? And I think that if you understand the grow model and the elevator pitch, it's going to help people really latch on to that vision and strategy. And it's going to make a lot more sense across the organization. And those same principles can be applied to a product or service vision and strategy as well. And finally, you need to shift that mindset from outcome or from output to outcome. We need to be respectful of outcome over output. And I think that when you shift that focus and stop trying to deliver as many widgets as possible and start focusing on solving issues and problems for the end user, you're going to start to see waste get eliminated. You're going to start to see morale increase. You're going to start to see the number of projects. If there's nothing else you can do, at least scale back the number of projects or products that are in motion. So if you have 10 things in motion right now, scale it back to 4, 5. If you have 100 things in motion, scale it back to 40. It doesn't need to be a one-time show or a one-time thing. What I'm saying is the fewer things that you have in flight will allow you to deliver more frequently. And the more frequently you deliver, the more frequently you can pivot. And you'll see revenue sooner, and you'll get things to market faster, and you'll have happy consumers, and you'll be able to quickly deliver and gather feedback. And you're going to see that empirical process really start to flow. You're going to see things starting to happen. So for some of you, I had a question that was directly related to, I'm not necessarily a C-level executive, or I'm not in that level of leadership, but I am part of the leadership team. what are some of the things that I can do to make myself better? What are some of the things that I can do to help me grow as a leader? So in order to become an Agile leader, anyone will tell you being a manager is easy. It's just a title. You're a manager. Congratulations. Here's your different color name badge. You're a manager, right? But being a true servant leader takes a lot of work and practice. It's not something that's easy or comes naturally. Uh, and I love this definition. You need to learn to put the needs of others first and lose yourself in serving them. If you can lose yourself in the service of other people, that's one of the key components to facilitating a successful Agile implementation. That's the fuel. That's the gasoline. That's what causes and ignites that fire to burn in everybody. You need to just lose yourself in everybody else. Agile leaders come in with trust at every single solitary level. They trust the work's going to be done. They trust the team's not going to bluff. They trust that things are going to happen, and they resist the urge to put undue pressure on individuals or teams in order to try to gain or elevate efficiency, or trying to game the system and trying to figure out how many story points a team's doing. It doesn't matter. We want them to focus on the big picture and what they can do to really relax. Let the reins go a little bit, let the team do their thing, and really enjoy the benefits or results of the team doing their things. We have a concept called Team John that we teach. We did a previous webinar on that, and I encourage you as leaders to watch that one as well. It helps your organization really grow and scale and stay focused on target initiatives and agenda, as opposed to allowing outside interruptions to take over and cause your team to collapse and not be able to deliver on initiatives. So another quick example or something I throw out there that's healthy for leaders is make efforts to become certified in Agile leadership, to show your team, hey, I'm walking the walk, I'm talking the talk. I went and attended a workshop and a session, and I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've seen these things in flight. I've asked all the right questions, and that way they gain a good vision of you being ready to change and shift your mental focus to be able to deliver on these promises that you're making inside of the organization. So while a manager drives resources, a leader coaches teams. A manager depends on authority. A leader acts with goodwill. A manager inspires fear. A leader generates enthusiasm. A manager says, I did this, I did that, I take accountability, I'm responsible, I feel like. A leader says, we. A manager places blame on others. A leader addresses breakdowns together with you and says, hey, what can we do? A manager knows how it is done. A leader shows how it is done. I like that one. A manager uses resources. If you haven't heard my speech on resources, you need to hear that. A leader develops team members, people who are excited about what they do. Managers take credit for what they do, while leaders give credit. Managers are popular for commands, giving commands and issuing commands. Leaders ask for things to be done. A manager says go, and a leader says let's all go, let's go, right? So there are so many powerful things that we can be doing differently, that we can be approaching to become a very healthy, strong, Agile leader. And I hope that you can take away some of this message. And I do encourage you to do two things. So a little bit of homework. One, go back and watch the 12-step webinar and download the document, and the Team John webinar. I think if you do those two, out of all the series, if you do those two, I think those two would probably be the most beneficial to you as an organization, along with this one, to accompany this from a leadership perspective. Also, there's some documents you can download, all available on the AgileDad website, agiledad.com. They have a whole section for downloads. They have a section for videos. They have a section for our cartoon or comic books. And they also have a section for the podcast, which is new. So if you haven't already taken advantage of the podcast, I highly encourage all of you. Every single day we talk about something new, but this whole week, even if it's just for this week, this whole week, we break down Agile leadership every single day. So every day we talk about a new topic regarding Agile leadership. Monday through Friday, it's all recorded, it's good to go, but we're going to talk about something brand new every single day. So I do encourage you to go and take a listen there. And it's 15 minutes or less a day, so it's not a huge time commitment. Most of them are around 10 minutes or so. And it's going to help you gain a better understanding of, it's called the Daily Stand-Up. So if you just go to any web browser, Google, type AgileDad, the Daily Stand-Up, it'll come right up. And it's available iTunes Podcast, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. Tune in, iHeartRadio, so anywhere where you get your popular podcast, it's available. It's a pretty highly successful little series there. So I encourage you to go listen to that. It's going to give you your daily dose, your 15-minute shot in the arm of all the things you need to know about Agile. So that's your homework. So go tackle it, see what you can figure out, take that 12-step program and mark it up and give yourself a rating, and then go back 30 days, 60 days, set your calendar and evaluate one group that's doing Agile and just kind of see where you are. Maybe even inquire of a coach from the outside or someone to help you get it all squared away. All those things can help you. So before I go any further, I just want to make sure that I say thank you. I realize that as leadership and as executives, you don't have a lot of time to do things, but the fact that you carved out time to be here with us today on this session is incredible. We couldn't be where we are today as an organization without you, but one of the things we strive to do is to help leaders all over the world be successful and to help with every type of Agile implementation. And I always like to close with some type of inspirational thought. So I'm going to leave you with an inspirational thought, then I'm going to shut down recording and answer some questions. So the thought that I had in mind for this session, it revolves around individuals and talents and being of great worth. And oftentimes when we look at an individual, one of the things that I learned is that I always try to find one thing about that individual that I'd want to emulate, whether it's a talent that they have, whether it's something about their personality. And I try to take that thing away from that person. I'm like, wow, that person's really courageous. So then until I meet the next new person, I try really hard to be courageous. And what I find is if I take all these different little pieces from different individuals as I meet them, it makes me a more well-rounded person and someone that people enjoy being around. So I encourage you, especially in this time of COVID where you're meeting remotely, to look for things that you appreciate about other individuals and take them into your own acumen. And I think that when you do, it's going to help you really build who you are and just become a much stronger person. So thanks again. You all are amazing. I couldn't do it without you. If you have any suggestions for the podcast, make sure that you let us know. We'd love to have your ideas for an episode. We'll feature you in an episode, not a problem. And if you have ideas for other upcoming webinars that we can do, we'd love to hear those too. But thanks for all you do. Thanks for being amazing. Thanks for being an Agile. And stay healthy, stay well, and stay Agile. Until next time, take care, my friends. I'm going to stick around and answer some questions.